Why Bear Sleeps So Much. Russian Folktale. Long ago, when the world was as fresh and new as a daffodil in springtime, the animals faced a serious problem. Troublesome Bear was ruining everything in their forest. The songbirds were all terrified whenever Bear passed through the woods in his usual clumsy way. He would blunder into branches, smashing the birds' fragile nests and eggs. Bear also crushed the hives of the bees and stole their honey, so the bees had a continuous argument with him. Bear squashed the tunnel-like homes of the gophers and the rabbits with his big feet, and in general caused so many disturbances that the animals couldn't relax. As angry as they were, however, the animals didn't really want to get into a scuffle with Bear. He was much too big and strong. Desperate, the animals called a meeting to decide on a course of action. "Why don't we just ask Bear to be more considerate?" suggested Deer timidly. Squirrel was quick to reject Deer's idea. "That won't work," Squirrel insisted, "because Bear never listens to anyone. I think he just enjoys walking all over us." "Throw Bear in jail," Rat shouted. "Force him to live a solitary life in a jail cell, and he won't be able to injure and torment us ever again." The animals nodded in approval at this idea until Mouse pointed out an obvious problem. "We don't have a jail," Mouse squeaked. "And if we did, someone would have to feed Bear in his cell." The very thought of feeding Bear made all the animals shake in fear. Other animals offered more ideas. Skunk suggested that Porcupine distribute some of his extra sharp quills in Bear's bed. Porcupine suggested that Skunk send some smelly spray into Bear's den. Neither animal was brave enough to try the other's plan, however, and the ideas probably wouldn't have worked anyway. Indeed, it looked as if there were no solution to the problem, and the animals were about to cancel the rest of their meeting. Fortunately, at that moment, Eagle flew in like a bolt of lightning. The animals cheered because Eagle was a veteran problem solver. Whenever there was trouble in the forest, Eagle found a way to put an end to it. This time, Eagle clutched a document in his sharp claws. "As we all know," Eagle thundered, "Bear can't hurt anyone or destroy anything when he's asleep. This statement," he said, waving the document, "requires Bear to sleep from October to April every year. I hope you will all sign it." What a great idea! The animals read the document and added their names to it. True, it didn't get rid of Bear permanently, but it gave them temporary relief. At the very least, the animals could look forward to peace and quiet for 6 months of every year. The myth doesn't say how the animals gave their signed document to Bear or what his reaction was to it. Who knows? Maybe he liked the animal's suggestion, for one thing is certain. Bear has been sleeping away half the year ever since.
Sybil Ludington's Ride, historical nonfiction. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Sybil Ludington. Thanks to a very famous poem, almost everyone knows about Paul Revere. The name of Sybil Ludington, however, is probably unfamiliar. Yet, like Revere, Ludington made an impressive midnight ride to warn American patriots, those fighting for independence, of an approaching British army. In April 1777, 2 years after Revere's famous ride, British soldiers made an assault on Danbury, Connecticut, not too far from where 16-year-old Sybil Ludington lived. The Continental Army, as the Army of the Americans was called, stored supplies in Danbury, and the British strategy was to burn them. Once the supplies were destroyed, the British began to burn the homes and workplaces of numerous patriots in Danbury. The villain in this raid was the British general William Tryon, who lost control of his soldiers and allowed them to hurt innocent citizens. A messenger quickly rode out from Danbury with news of the attack. His destination was the mill of Colonel Henry Ludington in nearby New York State. Only Ludington, the leader of about 400 Patriot volunteers, could fight off the British. After hearing the news, Ludington quickly agreed to help, but his men were spread out for miles. who would alert them? The messenger from Danbury did not know his way around the area. Ludington himself had to stay at home to assemble his soldiers as they arrived. Perhaps that's when Ludington's daughter, Sybil, volunteered to make the ride, or perhaps Ludington asked her to go. Either way, it was a shrewd choice. No one could dispute that Sybil was a skillful rider, and she knew the local roads well. Also, as the oldest of 12 children, she was used to responsibility. Sending Sybil was a decision that would be easy to justify. Sybil quickly mounted her horse and rode off on her mission. It was after 9 p.m. and raining when she left, and in the darkness, the rough, unmarked trails could be misleading. Sybil never lost her way, though, galloping from farm to village and calling out the news. In all, she rode 40 miles that night, twice as far as Paul Revere. Along the way, she had to avoid British spies and soldiers. According to one account, she even used a type of gun called a musket to scare away some outlaws who preyed on travelers at night. Sybil had a productive ride that night. When she arrived back home at dawn, more than 400 Patriot volunteers were gathering at her father's mill. Under Colonel Ludington, they were quickly converted into a regular fighting force. By now, the British had burned and abandoned Danbury and were marching inland. Ludington's forces, however, stopped the British advance. Later, at the Battle of Ridgefield, the Patriots fought the British invaders, who eventually retreated to their boats on Long Island Sound. In the months that followed, Sybil's father and the volunteers he led often praised and thanked Sybil for her heroic ride. Even General George Washington sent his congratulations for a job well done. Like so many other patriots, Sybil Ludington had come to the aid of her country. The Flight of the Monarch, magazine article. They are the only butterflies known to migrate or travel at a particular time of year. Some fly as far as 3,000 miles to reach their winter homes. They are also among the most vivid of all insects. Their bright orange, white, and black bodies can be seen flashing brilliantly in the sunlight. Their name is also appropriate because the monarch rules over the vast territory that it passes during its annual migration. When the first cold winds of autumn blow, monarch butterflies in the United States begin their long migration south. They cannot postpone this flight, or their bodies might freeze. Monarchs in the eastern states migrate to warm havens in Mexico. For monarchs west of the Rocky Mountains, the winter destination is Southern California. Monarchs tend to migrate south in large groups, but weaker ones often straggle far behind. At night, the butterflies roost together in tall fir, cedar, and pine trees. Monarchs usually cover from 50 to 100 miles a day, and it can take them up to 2 months to complete the trip. The long flight south can be treacherous. Cold weather and early snowstorms often take a toll on the travelers. Monarchs must be cautious and try to avoid danger. Many birds feed on monarchs too. Some butterflies run into obstacles, such as cars and trucks. Others just weaken and die from the strain of the difficult flight. The bluffs and peaks of the Sierra Madre, a mountain range in Mexico, make an ideal haven for the monarchs. The fir forests there provide the right temperature and humidity. The butterflies gather in a few small areas in colonies that consist of millions and millions of individuals. A single tree might be home for more than 10,000 of the insects. The monarchs are not active at this time. Like bears, they sleep away the winter months. To help preserve the monarchs, the Mexican government has taken steps to protect their winter home. For example, logging or the cutting down of trees is prohibited. Environmentalists despise this illegal activity, which shrinks the monarch's habitat. Also, as the forest thins, the butterflies are more likely to get wet and freeze during winter rainstorms. When the warm days of March arrive, the monarchs wake up and flutter down from their trees. After mating, the females lay their eggs. The eggs, which look like miniature pearls, hatch as caterpillars in about 4 days. After 2 weeks, each caterpillar transforms itself into a chrysalis, an egg-like pod. 10 days later, the adult monarch emerges. We must be clear when describing the migration of monarchs. The butterflies that flew south do not return north themselves. Only their offspring will begin the return flight in spring. Also, since most monarchs live only 6 weeks, it takes about 3 generations of monarchs to reach the northernmost states from Mexico. The females of each generation will deposit eggs along the route. Once grown, the new generation resumes the journey begun by its parents. Fortunately, the generation of monarchs that is alive in early autumn lives much longer, about 7 months. So those butterflies have time to make the long flight south. In this way, monarchs have populated large areas and lived on throughout the years.
Wagon Train Diary. Diary entries. May 1, 1849. Today, we said goodbye and started off to the land of gold. There are 30 wagons in our group and 60 people. We began with much laughter, but a mishap quickly spoiled the mood. While crossing the Missouri River, 2 wagons were swept away by the water, and the families inside barely escaped. May 15. The oxen plod on, slowly and steadily. How I wish they moved at a more aggressive pace. When it rains, we barely cover 2 miles in a day. Will we ever reach California? Everyone who emigrates wonders this, for the hours drag slowly. The bumping wagon bruises my bones, so usually I walk. My feet are sore, but the prairie flowers are beautiful, and I would not see them so well from the wagon. May 18. Just before noon, the sky looked hazy. I thought it must be full of smoke, but then we heard the buzzing and knew it was a swarm of grasshoppers in flight. There were more of them than anyone could imagine. The giant cloud of grasshoppers overwhelmed us, turning day to night. We did all we could to keep the pests off our faces until, mercifully, they moved on. June 3. Hurrah! Today we reached the Platte River. After weeks of dusty travel, how luxurious to sit in the water. The taste of fish is indeed a welcome change after salted pork. If only we could linger here, but we dare not. The wide span of a desert and the tall masses of a mountain range await us. June 19. At Independence Rock, so many emigrants have cut their names into the granite that I could barely find a spot for my own. Now my name will forever be associated with this landmark on the trail leading west. July 6. We took a cutoff and got lost. At last, we are heading the right way, but the oxen need water. Once we thought we saw a stream, but it was a mirage, a trick of sunlight that deceived us. August 6. It seemed like there would be no end to the wind and dust. 7 of our wagons turned back. Then there was a sight to behold at Soda Springs. Hot water puffed and spurted high into the air, leaving a trail of rainbows. I wouldn't have traded that beauty for the glamour of any big city. August 20. Grass is scarce, and the oxen groan. We had to lighten our load, and Father dumped our stove and pots and books. Necessity has made us flexible, and we cannot be too attached to our belongings. The long trail is littered with lovely things. September 8. Today, we traveled 14 miles and had to cross the Truckee River 12 times. September 15. Never did we believe that we'd make it up the rocky trail to the top of the Sierra Nevada, a mountain range in California. But here we are, and the majestic pines and peaks frame our first grand glimpse of California.
Baucis and Philemon. Ancient myth. In his palace on Mount Olympus, Jupiter, the supreme Roman god, was furious. "People are so corrupt," he told his grandson Mercury. "They lie, they cheat, they steal. It's a disgrace." "Is it really that bad?" asked Mercury. "Worse," replied Jupiter. "People don't even show hospitality to strangers anymore." This last blemish on the character of humans bothered Jupiter the most. Welcoming guests kindly was important to the king of the gods. "I have to teach people a lesson," the great god continued. "Before you unjustly accuse people and persecute them, let's travel to Earth and see for ourselves," suggested Mercury. "Maybe there are more good people than you think." Using Mercury's winged sandals, the two gods transported themselves to the city of Phrygia. There, they disguised themselves in ragged cloaks, so that no one would know they were gods. Looking at them, you would conclude that they were poor travelers. From house to house, the two nomads wandered, asking for water and bread. Sad to say, the situation was as bad as Jupiter had predicted. No one welcomed the travelers. "On your way!" one farmer warned, threatening to turn his dogs loose on them. "Get out of here!" a woman shouted, waving a blunt axe. So it went at every house in the city until at last the travelers came to Baucis and Philemon. Their one-room hut was falling down, for Baucis and Philemon were poor. They were also old, in their 80s, and had been married 60 years. "Come in, come in," Philemon welcomed the strangers. "You have walked a long way, for I can see the dust and the fatigue on your faces." "Will you stay for dinner?" Philemon's wife Baucis asked. "It isn't much. Fruit, bread, and olives, but you're welcome to share our meal with us." The god sat down at the rough wooden table, and Baucis lit candles to give the meal a festive atmosphere. As Philemon served the food, Baucis again apologized for the meal. "We live very simply," she said. "The important thing is that we love each other." Philemon nodded, but he had just detected something very strange. He brought his guests more food and drink every time their plates were empty, yet the serving pot and jug remained full. Only a god was capable of such a miracle. Reading Philemon's mind, Jupiter and Mercury threw off their cloaks and shone in all their glory. "In this entire city," Jupiter said, "only this house has shown us hospitality." As he spoke, another wonder occurred. The wooden hut fell away, and in its place stood a shining marble house. "Tell me what you wish for most," said Jupiter, "and I will give it to you." "Let this building be your temple, and let us be the priest here," Philemon began. "And let us die together, so neither ever has to live without the other," Baucis concluded. And so it was. Baucis and Philemon served in the temple for many years, and when they were about to die, Jupiter turned them into trees, an oak and a linden. Remarkably, both trees grew from the same trunk. Together, their long branches shaded the temple for generations.
The Surprising Life of Emily Dickinson. Biography. Once upon a time in the town of Amherst, Massachusetts, lived a young girl named Emily Dickinson. She was a lively, happy child who lived with her parents, sister, and brother in a big house near the village green. At school, Emily learned to read and write, and at home, she learned to cook and sew. Like many of her friends, she no doubt had a great capacity for fun as well, sledding in the cold New England winter and going on picnics in the green and flowering summertime. There was nothing unusual about young Emily. It seemed apparent that she would get married one day. Eventually, she would have her own house and raise her own children, perhaps in Amherst. In many ways, she would duplicate the life that her mother had lived. After all, that's what most girls did in the 1800s. When she was older, Emily went away to college for a while. She took a few trips, too, once traveling to Washington, D.C., where her father was a congressman. At home, she took part in town and church activities. When the Civil War began, she worked with other civilians to find ways to support the soldiers. Then, suddenly, everything changed. For some reason, Emily decided to withdraw from everyday life. She stopped seeing almost everyone, never traveled, and rarely went outside. Eventually, she didn't leave her parents' house at all, and that's how she lived for the rest of her life. What provoked Emily Dickinson to take this course of action? Even today, no one can say for sure. While the undoing of her normal social life must have caused loneliness and pain, it also enabled the young woman to accomplish something great. In the years that followed, Emily Dickinson wrote 1,775 poems. Sometimes Emily might send a poem to a friend, but she didn't try to publish her poetry. If anything, she concealed it, tying her poems in bundles and hiding them in her dresser drawers. Fortunately, Emily's poetry didn't stay hidden from the world. After her death, the poems were finally published. When they appeared in print, readers couldn't believe how rich and vast her output had been. Although she never left the shelter of her house, Emily Dickinson had a keen imagination. In a drop of water, she could see a flood. In a grain of sand, she saw a desert. To write so many poems, Emily Dickinson must have experienced many spurts of inspiration. Yet she crafted each poem carefully, choosing the exact words, rhythms, and punctuation to express her meaning. Some of the poems do reflect her loneliness, but they are inspiring too. Somehow, Dickinson could use a simple image: the wind in the trees, a robin on a garden path, a train in the valley, to suggest life's endless possibilities. Simply put, Emily Dickinson was one of America's finest poets. From the stillness of her quiet room in Amherst, her delicate yet powerful words echoed across the land. Eugenie Clark, Swimming with Sharks. Biography. 9-year-old Jeannie leaned against the glass barrier and stared at the fish. This was her first visit to the aquarium, and she couldn't keep her eyes off the underwater scene. Neon fish flashed by, and an octopus waved. Jeannie, however, stared mainly at the sharks. Imagine swimming with these graceful creatures. After that, Jeannie became a reliable visitor to the New York City Aquarium. She went back week after week, always learning about more ocean life. Soon she decided to become an ichthyologist, a scientist who studies fish. She was only in 4th grade, but Eugenie Clark calculated that there was nothing else that she would rather do than swim with the sharks. Years later, Jeannie's dream came true when, in her 20s, she became Dr. Eugenie Clark. She had degrees in marine biology and experience studying fish all over the world. Since diving was the best way to study fish, Dr. Clark obtained some scuba gear. On one early dive, a large shark appeared and gave her a jolt. Not frightened, Clark simply admired the shark's beauty. Swimming with sharks was fun, but Eugenie Clark also wanted to learn about them through experiments. To pursue this kind of work, she started a marine laboratory in Florida. Doing so made her the first woman in the United States to run her own marine biology lab, a considerable achievement. Over the years, Clark composed many articles and even wrote a book about her adventures that was called The Lady and the Sharks. The book became a bestseller, and people started calling her Shark Lady. Clark also helped teach people about ocean life through films and television shows. Always on the go, she did not appoint deputies to do the filming. Instead, she traveled the world to take part in it herself. During her travels, Clark often called attention to threats to the ocean environment. For example, she often dived in the Red Sea in Egypt. There, the Ras Mohammed reefs, like many of the world's coral reefs, were being harmed by pollution. To save the reefs, Eugenie Clark teamed with Egyptian scientists and divers. Together, these experts made the Egyptian government and public aware of the problem. Many Egyptians rejoiced when, as a result of their efforts, Ras Mohammed became Egypt's first national park. Eugenie Clark wasn't about to retire when she turned 65. Instead, she began to dive in submersibles, or mini-submarines. For Clark, the subs safely opened up new areas of the ocean for study. After all, diving deep down or for long periods of time in scuba gear can be unhealthy and dangerous. Exposure to salt water can shrivel a person's skin. The intense pressure of the water can leave a diver unconscious and senseless. By contrast, a diver in a submersible can descend thousands of feet with no harmful physical effects. Industrious as ever, Dr. Clark keeps studying sharks and writing books. Diving in submersibles, she continues to live her childhood dream of exploring the treasures of the sea. To her, of course, that doesn't mean sunken treasure chests and pirate loot, but rather the wonders of underwater life.
What happened to Pennsylvania Station? Essay. Cars and taxis passed the 84 pink granite columns that stood like guards at the front of the station. Pedestrians approached along an elegant arched passageway. The waiting room was 15 stories high and a block and a half long. In many ways, Pennsylvania Station, also known as Penn Station, was the heart of New York City. Built in 1910, the station was an energetic place. Filled with bustling crowds, Penn Station welcomed travelers with its bright and hearty atmosphere. Getting on or off a train here was an exciting thing to do. By the 1950s, however, fewer people were traveling by train. They had found alternate ways to travel. Airlines carried more and more passengers. New superhighways made driving long distances easier. By the end of the decade, the owners of Penn Station made a fateful decision. They would demolish the famous landmark. In its place, they would build an office building and a sports arena. The plan seemed to make financial sense, but little thought was given to train passengers. People would now have to board trains underground from small waiting areas near the train tunnels. Demolish Penn Station? When New Yorkers heard the plan, they couldn't believe their ears. One of the city's finest public places had been given a death sentence, and New Yorkers didn't like the verdict. Citizens joined together to save the landmark. For months, they would strive to rescue it from the wrecking ball. They pointed out that the station was an architectural treasure. It had played a key role in the life and history of the city. What's more, the new underground station would be cramped and uncomfortable. A person didn't have to be very observant to see that. Unfortunately, no one could stop the tragedy. City officials enforced the wishes of the owners, and in 1963, the wrecking balls went to work. Onlookers gazed in horror as an architectural masterpiece crashed to the ground in dust. In the end, New Yorkers resigned themselves to the loss of Penn Station. They had, however, learned a lesson. Landmark buildings had to be saved. A special Landmarks Commission was formed. Its primary purpose was to identify and protect the city's finest architecture. Its members recognized that as a city changes and matures, some older buildings do have to be demolished to make room for new ones. Landmarks, however, must be preserved. Ironically, by the 1990s, train travel had picked up at Penn Station, especially among commuters from surrounding towns. The underground station had difficulty handling the raging river of traffic. As predicted, few liked the cramped replacement. Some New Yorkers hoped to convert a grand old post office into a new train station. The post office is in the right place, and in some ways, it resembles the old Pennsylvania Station. The plan may work, but the overhaul will be a very difficult and costly feat. So the tragedy teaches another lesson. Sometimes, it's better to preserve what we have than to try to replace it.
The Competitive Edge, Contemporary Fiction. My friend Denise was the best distance runner on our track team. At least, I always assumed she was. In spring, we both run in 3-kilometer races in the vicinity of our school. She comes in first, and I might come in 5th or so, on a good day. I'm just not that focused on winning, I guess. And I certainly never thought anyone would displace Denise as the team's top runner. Maya, you had to be more competitive, Coach Karen told me after my last race. Today you look like you were jogging downtown for an ice cream cone. Coach isn't always considerate of my feelings. Still, there's truth to what she says. If you took a poll, most people would say athletes are naturally competitive, but for some reason, I wasn't. Not that there's anything bad or improper about wanting to win, especially in sports. In fact, a competitive spirit is a healthy thing. So why didn't I have more of it? That's what was on my mind last Friday just before the 3-kilometer race in Great Falls. When the race began, I watched Denise jump out to the lead as I fell back to the middle of the pack. This was identical to what had happened at the beginning of my last 2 races. I had come in 6th and 7th in those, but suddenly, that wasn't good enough. All of a sudden, I felt like winning. We were already running at a brisk pace, but I picked it up a bit. Running hard, I moved ahead of the 2 girls in front of me. This was risky, because pacing is all important in distance running. If I wasn't careful, I might not have enough energy to finish. I might come in last and humiliate myself. One thing was obvious. I wasn't jogging for ice cream today. In fact, I was gaining on Denise. With each step, I saw the soles of her track shoes more clearly. Usually my mind races faster than my body does in a race. I think about how far I've run and how far I have to go. I estimate how much energy I have left. I second-guess every move I make. This race, however, was different. This time my mind was completely empty.
except for one thought. I'm going to pull ahead. Incredibly enough, I did. I crossed the finish line less than a meter ahead of Denise. I had won my first race. Good race, I said to Denise after we had caught our breaths. Yeah, she muttered, looking like she was in shock after her unexpected downfall. Lucky win for me, I heard myself say. I guess I came up with that to soothe Denise's feelings. Just then Coach came over. That was more than luck, she said. You both ran a great race. It's just that Maya wanted the win more. Finally. I have to admit that winning the race felt great. It's a memory I cherish. Also, now that I've won once, I want to prove that I can do it again. Maybe that's what competition is all about.
Ireland's Great Famine, textbook entry. High in the Andes Mountains of Peru, in a climate too cold for corn, the Inca people grew the first potatoes. The Spanish who arrived in Peru in 1532 were interested in gold and silver, not potatoes. Nevertheless, when they descended the Andes and left Peru, they carried some of the strange new vegetables with them and later brought them back to Spain. From there, the potato spread to other parts of Europe. Many people who grew and ate potatoes enjoyed the new food, but some doctors and scientists had serious doubts. They condemned potatoes, claiming they caused disease. In France, some even tried to abolish the planting of the new crop, claiming it ruined the soil. Despite these extreme reactions, however, most Europeans eventually realized that potatoes were a good source of nutrition. Nowhere were potatoes grown more widely than in Ireland. In the 1600s, Ireland was a very poor country, controlled by an English parliament that acted like a dictator. Most Irish farmers could only afford to rent small plots of land. Raising enough food for a family was a constant challenge. The thrifty Irish farmers saw that they could grow more potatoes on their land than they could wheat, oats, or barley. Also, potato fields did not need to be plowed. As a result, a farmer did not need a horse and plow, only a shovel, to plant potatoes. For these reasons, potatoes became Ireland's main source of food. For over a century, the new crop helped feed a growing population. Then, in 1845, disaster struck. A fungus, which is a type of plant growth, attacked the crop. On a visual level, its effects were horrifying. It could turn a healthy green potato field into a dark, wilted mess. On a practical level, the harm it could cause soon became clear as well. The fungus destroyed half of Ireland's potato crop that year. Although this occurrence caused widespread hunger, most people survived and looked forward to the next harvest. In fact, many farmers expanded their fields, hoping to grow more potatoes the following year to make up for their losses. Sadly, the farmers' hopes were in vain. In the summer of 1846, the fungus reappeared. This time, Ireland's entire potato crop was lost. The nation's food supply chain, already fragile and brittle, snapped. Food prices shot up, and a serious famine gripped the land. To survive, people appealed to friends and relatives for help. They sold whatever portable possessions they had on hand in order to buy food. Eventually, they had nothing left that could be carried away. Even worse, after a time, there was no food left to buy. The potato fungus was like a predator, and the Irish people were its prey. Weak from hunger, many were unable to fight off disease. To make matters worse, the normally mild Irish winter turned bitterly cold in the winter of 1846 to 1847. By 1848, about 1 million people had died of hunger or disease. Another 1 million had left Ireland to start new lives in North America. In the years that followed, good potato harvests returned, but for the estimated 1/4 of the population that had died or emigrated, it was too late.
National Ski Patrol to the rescue. Magazine article. Avalanche! Without warning, it happens. A mountainside of loose snow suddenly slides down a slope toward a downhill skier. As the skier looks up in horror, he loses his footing. It is as if a carpet has suddenly been pulled out from under his feet. Tons of snow knock him over and drag him down a hillside. In seconds, the skier is buried. At first, he is angry with himself for not staying with his group and for getting himself into such a dangerous situation. Muttering tart comments about his bad luck, he tries to dig his way to the surface. He is too deeply buried for that, though. Instead, He decides to stay still and conserve the oxygen in the air pockets around him. Absurd as it sounds, the skier nestles into the snow, hoping that the other members of his ski party will have seen the avalanche and notice that he is missing. Fortunately, the buried skier is wearing a beacon. This electronic device sends out a regular signal to help rescuers locate him. There is no realistic way to avoid all the dangers of winter in the back country. Devices like beacons, however, reduce a skier's risk in the wilderness. The skier's companions have seen the avalanche and realize that their partner is missing. As they race closer, they call in an urgent plea for help. Fortunately, members of the National Ski Patrol, NSP, are in the area. On snowmobiles, they navigate across the rugged landscape toward the disaster site. The National Ski Patrol is the largest winter rescue organization in the world. Since 1938, NSP volunteers have searched for and rescued thousands of skiers and hikers. The organization provides a sense of security for people who use the slopes. The guiding principle of the National Ski Patrol is to promote safe skiing and winter sports. The National Ski Patrol classifies the country into different geographic regions. Volunteers patrol the ski slopes and wilderness ski areas in the region where they live. When choosing its volunteers, the organization is very selective. In addition to being in excellent physical shape, members must complete advanced training in outdoor emergency care. In areas where avalanches tend to occur, members receive special avalanche training too. These steps help to ensure the success of rescue efforts. Thanks to their high level of preparation, the NSP rescuers are able to help the skier buried by the avalanche. Immediately after arriving on the scene, they turn their own beacons to receive. That lets them hear the signal from the skier's beacon. The rescuers also spot the ski mitten that the skier lost in the avalanche. That's another clue to his whereabouts. The rescuers have identified the general area where the skier must be. Now they carefully probe the most likely areas with long aluminum poles. Methodically, they cover the area, probing every foot or so. Suddenly, they hear a muffled cry. Fortunately, the snow is light and fluffy. It contains a lot of air. That lets the rescuers move it away quickly to reach the skier. More important, the buried man had enough air to breathe. Soon a helicopter arrives to transport the skier to a hospital. It was a close call, but thanks to the National Ski Patrol, there was a happy ending.
A Message for Norrod. Science fiction. Zella had searched the dusty landscape for food all morning, but found only a few shreds of wild dates and some tasteless roots. Food transports from the home planet had stopped 2 months earlier, and the colonists who had come to Norrod to live and work were hungry. The planet's pitiless climate, always hot and dry, made agriculture impossible. Besides, the Norrodian colonists weren't farmers, but miners who were digging up valuable minerals. The mineral transports to the home planet, along with communications, had also stopped. Colony officials had offered a few flimsy explanations for the halt, but these excuses lacked detail and were not convincing. Zella walked back to her dome. The dwelling in the shape of a half-sphere was large but poorly furnished. Before she got there, she saw an unfamiliar spacecraft spinning above one of the landing pads. As it rotated, it also moved slowly downward. The strange-looking craft must be a migrant. Had it traveled from another solar system? It did not display the flag of Zella's home planet. Curious, Zella and a few other colonists approached it. A military patrol arrived but was unable to confirm the craft's identity. "Follow the procedure for unidentified spacecraft," Major Poe barked to his soldiers. "Do not assume this craft is friendly or neutral." Some of the soldiers had turned on message devices, hoping to get a response from the spacecraft. "If we receive no response in 15 minutes, Major Poe stated, we will have to take action against it." 13 minutes passed, and the strange spacecraft made no response. In a daze because of the tension and suspense, Zella watched and waited. "Prepare to destroy the intruder," Major Poe ordered. "Wait!" Zella cried, springing into action and rushing forward. "For all you know, this craft may come from a friendly planet." A soldier grabbed Zella, shouting insults and words of abuse. How dare a Class 3 miner interfere with Norrodian security, he said, sneering at Zella's worn and dusty miner's suit. Zella didn't care whether she looked presentable. She was gauging the distance to the spacecraft, about 100 meters. Breaking free from the soldier's grasp, she raced toward it. A ladder was built into the side of the craft, and Zella quickly scrambled up to the main hatch. Behind her, Zella heard Major Poe ordering his soldiers. Raise the deflection screens! Surely they would not destroy the craft while she was on it. Or would they? Now in the main hatch, Zella saw a large green light on a control panel. Instinctively, she placed her hand on it. Greetings to the colonists of Norrod, a loud message immediately began. The message was in Zella's language. This is an unmanned craft from planet Earth. It comes in peace, bringing food and supplies for your survival. Then the craft's main cargo bay door opened, revealing crates of food as well as water purifiers, solar cookers, and other appliances. Zella slowly climbed down from the craft and walked back to the soldiers. The crowd had grown in size, and nearly everyone was cheering and thanking Zella. Yes, thank you, Zella, said Major Poe, approaching her. Thank you for keeping an open mind and not giving in to fear.
Crispus Attucks changes history. Historical nonfiction. A cold wind swept in from Boston Harbor on the night of March 5th, 1770, and fresh snow lay on the streets. On Boston Common, the British soldiers, who later became known as Redcoats, sat inside their tents. They had been camped there for months in conditions neither comfortable nor sanitary. At a time of rising tension in the colonies, the Redcoats were there to preserve the peace and enforce the new trade laws. For the soldiers, it was a monotonous assignment. They had little to do. Sometimes they debated political issues with the colonists. More often, the colonists hurled insults at the Redcoats, whom many regarded as foes. This night, some colonists were throwing snowballs from the darkness. Accounts vary about exactly what happened next. A scuffle seems to have broken out, and a nearby church bell rang an alarm. Citizens angry and tense about the Redcoats gathered at Boston Common. Some citizens carried sticks and clubs. As the crowd grew larger, the Redcoats forced the colonists back. According to several accounts, a small group of colonists suddenly charged the Redcoats. Urged on by their leader, a tall black man named Crispus Attucks, the men waved their simple weapons and shouted insults at the British. Attucks may have taunted the soldiers by saying, "Shoot if you dare." Then, as the crowd began to throw things at the soldiers, Attucks is said to have clubbed one of the Redcoats and grabbed for his bayonet, the blade at the end of his rifle. This latter move by Attucks proved too much for the soldiers. Fearing for their safety, the Redcoats fired, and Attucks fell dead. When the smoke cleared, a number of colonists lay sprawled on Boston Common. In all, 5 died from their wounds and 6 recovered. Although Crispus Attucks was probably the first victim in the cause that became the American Revolution, little is known about him. Said to be the son of an African father and a Native American mother, he grew up a slave in Massachusetts. In 1750, when Attucks was about 27, he ran away from his owner and may have gone to sea on a whaling ship. Nothing else was heard from him until the night of what became known as the Boston Massacre. That's what the Patriot leaders called it, a massacre, to build support for the cause of freedom. On that night, the foundations of American independence were laid, President John Adams later wrote. Thousands of angry colonists attended a public funeral for Attucks and the other victims in Boston's Faneuil Hall. Speakers praised the bravery that Attucks had exhibited, and newspaper accounts retold the story. Attucks and the others acquired even more fame with Paul Revere's widely known engraving of the massacre. Prints made from the engraving were distributed around the colonies, building support for Boston and hatred for the Redcoats. For 5 years, the memory of the Boston Massacre fanned the flames of revolution. In the end, the reckless bravery of Crispus Attucks had widespread consequences. His achievement was nothing less than changing the course of American history.
A Giant Hoax, Nonfiction Narrative. The well diggers on William Newell's farm in Cardiff, New York, got quite a shock one October morning in 1869. A few feet down, their shovels uncovered a 10-foot-long man. The body appeared to be petrified. That is, over a very long time, it had turned to stone. News of this singular discovery traveled fast. Was this proof that giants had once walked the earth? People from all over swarmed to see the giant fossil. Newell's relative, George Hull, spotted a money-making opportunity and charged each visitor 10 cents a peek. As the crowds increased, Hull raised the price to 50 cents, the equivalent of about $6 today. Soon, a group of businessmen began to pursue Hull, begging him to sell them the Cardiff giant. Hull finally agreed to a price of $37,000, and the stone creature was moved to Syracuse, New York. Now even more people lined up to see it. Among the visitors were several paleontologists, scientists who study ancient remains. Their negative opinions of the Cardiff giant revealed they were not impressed. Convinced it was not real, they labeled it a fraud. In support of these conclusions, they pointed out the rough chisel marks on the giant's body. They also noted that acids had been used to make the fossil look old. In short, William Newell and George Hull had some explaining to do. When George Hull was questioned, he offered no cover story, no alibi. On the contrary, he was surprisingly frank. With the help of a Confederate, an Iowa man who was a sculptor, he had carved the statue and modified its appearance with acid. The statue was shipped east by rail and then discharged with other cargo at a station near Cardiff. From there, Hull carted it to the farm of William Newell. He then buried the giant on the farm and waited a year before hiring workers to dig in the same spot. Why would George Hull do such a thing? At the time of the hoax, many people believed that real-life giants had once walked the earth. Hull disagreed. Apparently, he just wanted to poke fun at this belief. When he saw how much money he could make, however, he decided to let people think the Cardiff giant was real. A practical joke had turned into a money-making swindle. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. At this time, P.T. Barnum reigned over the world of popular entertainment, and the great showman wanted the Cardiff giant in his traveling circus. The owners, however, refused to rent it to Barnum, not even for $30,000 a month. In response, Barnum came up with a more economical approach. He had an exact replica made, put in his show, and claimed it was the original one. This fraud should have led to a boycott or mutiny by Barnum's customers, but it didn't. Even more people lined up to see the counterfeit giant. Like most sensations, the Cardiff giant gradually faded from memory. For decades, it lay undisturbed in a barn near Syracuse. Eventually, however, it was put on exhibit at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. Today, visitors there still line up and pay to see the giant hoax.
Pecos Bill ends a drought. Tall tale. According to the tales that Texas cowboys used to tell, Pecos Bill was raised along the Pecos River by coyotes. That upbringing might have been a bit unusual, but it gave Bill superhuman powers. Just about everything Pecos Bill did was a spectacle. He had a lariat as long as Texas, so he could rope a herd of cattle with just one throw. To keep those cattle safe, he decided to use New Mexico as his pasture. Fencing in that pasture would have complicated anyone else's life, but not Bill's. He just persuaded the prairie dogs to dig the post holes for him. These stunts that Bill performed had universal appeal. Even the sun showed its curiosity, straining closer and closer to get a better look at whatever Bill was up to. That's what caused the Great Texas Drought. Never had the state been so dry before. The sun didn't mean any harm, but it got so close that it scorched the land. Every blade of grass dried up and turned brown because of the burning heat. Talk about a hot summer. The heat was so severe that the chickens laid fried eggs. People wanted to cry and grieve, but there wasn't enough water for tears. Pecos Bill felt the discomfort too. After all, the tragic situation was partly his fault. A moral man, Bill always tried to do what was right. He was also a man of action, so he decided to end the drought. Hopping onto his horse Widowmaker, Bill galloped north across Oklahoma. Halfway up Tornado Alley, he spotted what he was looking for. A big black twister had just torn up half of Kansas and was heading down toward Oklahoma for a repeat performance. Bill didn't hesitate for a second. Taking out his lariat, he roped the tornado and climbed onto its neck. "Howdy, friend," said Bill in his courteous way, looking directly into the eye of the storm. "I could use your help down in Texas." "How dare this little cowboy trifle with a tornado?" the twister snorted to itself. Bucking like a bronco, the big funnel-shaped cloud whirled, twirled, and zigzagged south, hoping to throw Bill off. Bill held on, though, digging his spurs into the tornado's sides and riding it south. Past Galveston and out into the Gulf of Mexico, the twister spun, quickly filling with water. That's just what Bill was planning. Full of water, the tornado slowed down a bit, allowing Bill to steer it west over Texas. There, with a few well-placed kicks, Bill turned the twister into a giant watering can. Once the tornado had dropped all its water, it turned nasty again. So Bill rode it back to the Gulf for more. In all, Bill made 6 trips, bringing enough water to end the drought and eliminate the hardship he had caused. Actually, only 5 trips would have been necessary. When Texans saw Bill coming back with his 6th load, they waved their hats and shouted, "No!" Any more water and they'd have a flood. In the end, Bill rode the twister over to Arizona and dumped all the water in one great swoosh, a washout that created the Grand Canyon.
Why did the woolly mammoths disappear? Journal article. Before humans arrived in North America, giant-sized mammals walked the land. The best known were 2 elephant-like animals, the woolly mammoth and the mastodon. Less familiar is the short-faced bear, a rough and rowdy creature about 30% larger than today's grizzly. Saber-toothed tigers, some weighing as much as 800 pounds, were a threat to any creature that trespassed in their territory. There were also giant wolves, as well as camels, horses, and sloths. In terms of size, these creatures have no peers among the North American mammals of today. The mega mammals fared well on the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. At the beginning of the last ice age, about 130,000 years ago, the animals were still thriving. Even though ice covered much of the continent, the land was fertile enough to provide food. Then, near the end of the ice age, something happened. The large mammals died off. It's impossible to give a rigid timetable for when these animals became extinct, because these extinctions happened too long ago. Yet at some point, about 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, both the glaciers and many of the mammals seem to have disappeared rather suddenly, all at the same time. For a long time, people assumed that the giant creatures had been hunted to extinction. The first human hunters had left Asia and wandered onto the North American continent about this time. Hunting with spears, the newcomers fanned out across the continent. As the colonies of humans expanded, the theory goes, they killed off many species. Were there enough hunters to endanger so many species? Few archaeologists think so. Other facts also undercut this theory. For one thing, archaeological sites are crammed with clues about what the early hunters killed and ate. Mammoths and mastodons were their favorites. Apparently, these people didn't hunt the other extremely large mammals. Yet these animals died off too. Furthermore, the early people did hunt bison, but this species, of course, survived. Recently, scientists have furnished another explanation for the extinctions. A large comet, which is a traveling body of ice and dust, may have exploded on or just above Earth about 12,000 years ago. The clouds of dust from the disaster would have caused a long period of cooling on Earth. The cold temperatures would have led to the extinctions of dozens of species. There is evidence for the comet theory. Arctic ice that formed about 12,000 years ago shows high levels of iridium, the element found in comets and meteorites. Also, tiny diamonds called nanodiamonds appear in soil samples dating from 12,000 years ago. The flash of the explosion could have formed them. This theory could explain why large mammal species would have died off so suddenly. Many species, however, survived the disaster and cold climate. Among them are the wild animals that we're most familiar with today. Why were they safeguarded from the cooling while the larger species were not? By unraveling the history and mystery of ancient climate change, scientists hope one day to find the answer.
The Hunger Strike, an Aesop fable. Today, the parts of the body get along and work together surprisingly well. But that wasn't always true. Long ago, head, legs, and arms had frequent squabbles with one another. There was a great deal of friction among them. One of the few things they had in common, in fact, was their dislike for Belly. Most of the time, they disregarded Belly completely and weren't even sure where he lived. When they did turn their attention to him, their main complaint was about his lack of purpose. They all agreed that Belly had never done an honest day's work, that he only cared about eating. Thinking about Belly's laziness, Head eventually felt such profound anger that he called a meeting of the other body parts. "It's time to teach that lazy Belly a lesson," he announced loudly. Legs and arms couldn't agree more. They found the idea irresistible and immediately asked Head what he had in mind. "Well, from now on," explained Head, "I'm not going to figure out any ways to find food." With his sharp eyes and quick brain, Head was the body part that found the majority of the body's food. "Belly won't like that," remarked Legs with a smile. Then, to show that he was in complete agreement with Head, he said, "And I promise not to walk over to any food, even if it's lying on the ground right in front of us." "This is going to be good," giggled Arms, clapping his hands together for emphasis. "I won't pick up any food," he promised the others, "and I'm not doing any cooking either." All went according to plan, and after a few weeks of no food, Belly indeed was grumbling. "Please," he begged, "a crust of bread, anything." The other body parts, however, could take no real joy in Belly's misery, for they were having problems themselves. Head, for example, experienced frequent dizziness. Then a new phenomenon, a splitting headache, made it impossible for him to think. Legs grew weaker and weaker, often stumbling into swamps and other desolate places. Even Arms, who was by now covered with sores from shoulders to fingertips, realized something was very wrong. As the body's problems accumulated, Head had to intervene. He called the body parts to another meeting. "Even though Belly never seems to work," Head began, "he must have a purpose. Otherwise, starving him wouldn't have caused us so many problems. For our own sakes, therefore, I suggest we compromise and start feeding him again." Legs and Arms agreed with Head. They were greatly relieved that the standoff had come to an end. Without wasting another minute, the whole crew went out to find some dinner. Once the meal had been eaten, Belly's loud grumbling subsided, and the other body parts started feeling much better too. Moral: each member of a group must do his or her part for the common good.
Sequoyah, Advocate of His People. Biography. The Cherokee were an eastern woodland people whose original territory spread across a significant portion of the southeastern United States. Many Cherokee villages had 30 to 60 homes built around a large meeting house known as a council house. At the center of each village was a town square where people gathered for dances, games, and ceremonies. Sequoyah was born in a Cherokee village in Tennessee around 1770. At that time, white colonists were moving onto Cherokee land, often signing treaties to do so. The Cherokee people, however, had no written language, only a spoken one, and they could not read English. This was a fundamental problem because the spoken promises of the white settlers often contradicted the legal terms of the treaties. As a young man, Sequoyah moved to Georgia, perhaps to escape the white settlers. There he became a skilled silversmith. His ignorance of written English, however, prevented him from signing his craft items like other craftspeople. During the War of 1812, Sequoyah, like many Cherokees, joined the American Army. While on duty, Sequoyah often watched white soldiers reading battle orders as well as letters from their families. Before the war, Sequoyah had begun his preliminary work on developing a Cherokee system of written communication. Now he turned his attention to this challenge. First, Sequoyah listened carefully to spoken Cherokee. Over time, he extracted 85 or 86 basic sound syllables from his observations. Every Cherokee word is some combination of these syllables. Sequoyah next assigned one symbol to each sound syllable. He borrowed some symbols, such as Roman numerals, and made up others. He also retained a few letters from English. By 1821, Sequoyah had completed his work. The Cherokees adopted his concept of representing sounds in the Cherokee language as written symbols. An advocate of education, Sequoyah personally taught the written language to hundreds of Cherokees. He also publicly demonstrated the results of his efforts. No one could have anticipated the success of written Cherokee. In a short time, thousands of Cherokees learned to read and write. In 1828, the Cherokee people began to publish their own newspaper. It was called the Cherokee Phoenix, and it is still printed today. The Cherokee also used their new language to write a constitution. This document helped them form their own government, the Cherokee Nation. The Constitution described the internal workings of this government. Sequoyah believed that reading and writing would help the Cherokee hold on to their land. Sadly, this premise proved to be untrue. According to the terms of the 1828 Indian Removal Act, all Native Americans had to give up their land and move west of the Mississippi. Between 1838 and 1839, an estimated 17,000 Cherokees were forced to move to Oklahoma. About 4,000 people died on this terrible trip, causing the Cherokee to call it the Trail of Tears. In Oklahoma, the Cherokee faced another challenge. They had to learn how to survive in a new and different place. To do this, they depended on their written constitution and laws. They published important information in their newspaper. Written communication helped the people adjust to a new way of life.